everybody's here today for transitioning from peer to supervisor, right? Yes, Cindy. All right, very good. Let me introduce myself. As Jody said, I'm Cindy Schisler, and worked 25 years for the university in terms of training development. I was in two different aspects. The first aspect, I've been here many times before doing things, is working through, we had a Center for Performance Excellence, which I directed, and we were housed in downtown Dayton, and we partnered with different organizations throughout the state of Ohio and mainly the Miami Valley area. And so, really had the opportunity to get to know a lot of the corporations, the companies that we had, and get an idea of what was going on around here. We all know what happened 2008, 2009, our economy tanked here. A lot of our work was done through the manufacturing plants, and they're gone. So I don't even know if any of you are old enough to remember the saying. So I'm aging myself. But there was a saying that says the shoemaker's kids never had any shoes. In other words, you're so busy taking care of what you do for a living sometimes that you forget to take care of those who are nearest to you. Well, the same thing was with the university. We trained students, and I was out busy running around training others, teaching others, but we weren't really good about doing it internally at Wright State. So then I came in and we transitioned, and I became the training person internally to the university, which I did until I retired, and teaching, and I still do consulting on my own small business on the side. So that's what I'm doing today. So my question to you is, how many of you in this room are currently really transitioning from being a peer to a supervisor? You're going to be supervising people you worked with. How many of you are here because, you know what, I would like to be in that position. I'm looking to transition. That is on my goals. It was something I'd like to see happen, and I want the information on how I could be successful right off the bat. Anybody fit in those three descriptions? Good. I'm glad I saw a lot of hands here. So that's what we're talking about today. We think, oh, okay, great. I have the opportunity, a position's coming up. I am going to transition from being a supervisor. And oftentimes you end up supervising or leading or managing those you were buddies with not too long ago. And we think, oh, no big deal. You know, I'm friends with these guys. We're in the same department. This is going to be good. I think some of the things that they forget to tell you is that transitioning from a peer to a supervisor is a lot different than what you think it's going to be. So this is not to be discouraging, because that's not what it is. I just wanted to give you some of the pointers, some of the tips. I personally transitioned from peer to a supervisor. I will share some of the things that I went through, which are no different than we're going to be talking about, or a lot of other people have gone through as I do this training, just to give you some ideas on how to make this easier for you, easier for your employees. Before coming a supervisor, and for some of you, you've always accepted the role, others are working that way. There's three questions I want you to ask yourself, and we're going to work through these throughout the training this morning. And the first one is, question one, I want you to look at this, and then I want you to talk with your table about this. Do you really want the job? Did you take the job because you really, really wanted it? Was it kind of like you drew the last straw and you kind of had to accept the position? All right? So why do you want it? You need to be able to answer yourself that question. So do you really want it? Why do you want the job? And what do you think you can personally bring to the job? Why don't you just talk amongst yourselves for a few minutes? Just have a conversation. Oftentimes we get into leadership positions, and again, I was starting to tell you, oftentimes we're not trained, we're not prepared, nobody has time to do it. And sometimes it's just because you feel like you should take it, you've been offered it, you've been working for this. So anyway, let's take maybe about 5 or 6 minutes on this and talk about this in your group, and then I'll ask just for some of you to just share some of the thoughts you had. All right? Why did you want to be a supervisor? What was it? Yeah, for the challenge to do something different. This is a perfect time to be taking this this training this morning, this workshop this morning, is just to get some understanding of, okay, I've been here for 20 years. What do I need to do when I get transitioned up? These seems like simple questions, but really, before we jump in to do something different, ask yourself these questions, because it is going to be a change. And I'm not saying a negative change, I'm just saying it's going to be different. So, all right, so we decided we wanted to do this. What are some of the challenges that either you're facing, you're in this job, these are some of the challenges you're facing, or what are some of the challenges you think you could face? Maybe you observe people in the situation, or maybe just thinking about it, thinking about the dynamics of the group you're working with. What could be some challenges? Discuss that in your group. I'll give you about another 5 minutes. Communication, and we will talk a little bit about this, to me is the number one thing that you can do is make sure you have that open, honest communication. And we'll talk more about that, but it's huge. I had said in my introduction that I had been with the university for a long time. Most of my years were in outside, working with outside companies. And I've thought about this a lot. The number one issue I think organizations had that they wouldn't have to experience if they had it was ineffective communication. Ineffective communication, it would save them so many conflicts, so much miscommunication, so many missed opportunities. If I don't communicate directly with you, I'm going to make it up myself. I'm going to fill in the blanks myself. I'm going to make up stuff myself. So communication is huge, it really is. So sometimes it's just coming in and like that was already stated, maybe coming into a situation that wasn't real functional, and how do you, as you take steps to change it, what happens? Sometimes too, you may be coming in after Mr. and Mrs. Wonderful. You know, the leader, the supervisor has left and they were dynamic, and now you've got shoes to fill. You know, and then you got people with expectations, and you got things that you want to try and things you want to do, and those can also be challenges. So there's a lot of different challenges that you may face. The important thing is how we handle them when we come, and as you're striving to get in the position of a supervisor, think through some of these things. As you know your area, and you know your people you'll be supervising, think through it, all right? Just a slide I have. New managers' greatest challenges. A CFO's revealed the most difficult part of becoming a manager. 32% said balancing individual responsibilities and overseeing the staff. Now, you have a staff to oversee, but you got to learn your new job too. You know, it takes time. 19% said supervising friends or former peers. We will spend time on that. 17% said motivating the team. All right. Sometimes in transitions, things can go down. 16% said figuring out how you're going to prioritize the projects you've inherited. Now, you've been in that department, so you should be familiar with the projects that need to be done. And another 16% said meeting higher expectations. So these are all some of the challenges that can pop in. We're going to spend some time talking about what I think are maybe the 8 top tips. You may have others we can add to that list, but it's 8 tips for transitioning from peer to supervisor. When you come into the position, reach out to your stakeholders. Who are your stakeholders? Somebody who has an interest invested in your company, your organization, right, your department. So that is correct. So who would stakeholders be of the Miami Valley Communications Council?
The member communities?
Yes, absolutely. The people you serve, the members of your community. Who else? I think we tend to think too big, you know, obviously the community, your customers, things like that. But it's also who fills up the Coke machines, who delivers the paper to the office. Anybody has any kind of contract or vested interest in your organization is considered a stakeholder, all right? They have stake in it. When I transitioned from a peer to director of the Center for Performance Excellence in downtown Dayton, obviously I inherited the staff, and I hadn't been that long, maybe a year when I was promoted, and they had, like you said, it hadn't been real good there. There was a lot of mistrust. There was divisiveness between the floors of people. There was staff, and then there was professional trainers, and then there was, it was just kind of weird. it was a challenge. It was a challenge of building trust among those in the building who I didn't directly supervise, which were other departments, but they were still under the building, and my immediate peers, all right? So reaching out and figuring out, I reached out and figured out who my stakeholders were, all right, and made sure I had conversations, at least introduced myself. At least the guy that delivered Pepsi knew my name and knew what to do if there was a problem, all right? I made appointments and reached out to every department on campus, and I met with the directors. You know, it's just important that people know who you are, and you can figure out who you need to talk to and who you don't, just to make sure there was a face and there was a name, and I was introduced, because sometimes those stakeholders can be good allies when you absolutely need them. So reach out to your stakeholders. Second piece, number 2, you gotta get smart. And this is where some of the time-consuming hard parts of leadership is. All right, not only are you learning your job, but you're supervising these peers that you have. And you may or not be having challenges, and things will be different. You want to make changes. However, don't quit learning. It's just one of the things that is so important. So, like in your spare time, take leadership training. I can't overemphasize how important that is. And this is where Jody and the organization has already said is so good at providing training. When you get the chance to come to some of these trainings that you think are going to be beneficial for your job, invest in that time to do it. I remember a gentleman told me once, we were talking about, it was talking about young folks coming into the organization, and I was going on about, you know, the importance of developing employees. And some young people have a, you know, they're maybe about a 5-year, you know, stay 5 years and then they move on. Actually, that's a trend that's kind of pushed in universities. I will not deny that. You work for a while, then you move on. You work for a while, then you move on. His comment to me was, what if I invest my training dollars into young people and they move on? And my comment was, what if you don't? And they stay. So, you know, anytime you have an opportunity to train, encourage others in your department to train, yeah, just do it. It's definitely worth it. Find out where your resources are in tools of management tools and different resources. What does HR have to offer? HR may have also books. They may have things on development, on training that you could take and read. Search for books on leadership, articles on leadership. There are zillions of them out there. There really are. Most of them carry over some continuous ideas, all right? Learn your HR policies. That's one of the big things for me was I really had to learn and figure out what the policies were. Because when you get asked or something happens and you don't know it, or at least have a rough idea of what's going on, that makes you look, in some ways it can make you look a little incompetent on the rules that you're trying to enforce. Ask HR. If you don't have a copy, they have them. Become friends with. They're one of your stakeholders. And in terms of leadership, they can be a big help. Kind of learn about your employees. Again, I'm not putting anybody on the spot, but when you stepped into the role of supervisor, you worked with your peers. Did you do anything at all to find out more about them? To learn more about them? To learn about when you hire new people in? I'll touch on that in a minute, but just maybe looking at the personnel file, you have access to that, their resumes, their performance reviews, their personal goals. You're now leading a group of people. You have your goals. You wanted to become in the leadership position. They got goals too, you know, and what are they? And part of what you are going to need to do is not just learn your job yourself, but figure out how you're going to grow and develop your employees. All right, grow and develop your employees, right. As an individual contributor, your number one job was to do your job well. But now, your number one job is to help others get their job done well, as long as with your own. All right, the key. So get smart. What are some of the things that you can learn about leadership, about yourself, and about your team? Changing your focus is definitely, it's critical. I'm going to give you guys to talk amongst yourself for just a moment. I threw the question out, but sometimes talking for a few minutes helps. How can you grow and develop those on your team? So now you're responsible for a team, you're learning a job yourself, you got these people. What are some ways that you think you could, or you've observed happen, or somebody's done with you, to grow and develop this team you're now leading? Take 5. Yeah, I hope in your training, in your evaluations, there's a piece that what are your goals are and how can I help you accomplish them? You know, what can I do? Because that's an important factor too.
Make those goals measurable.
And oh yes, and make the goals measurable. Absolutely. They got to be able to know when you're setting goals for them, this is where we are, how can I get where I'm going, and understanding how I'm going to get that way. And help them set their own goals to be measurable. Good, that's a good point. Frontline, he said, has some good ideas. They're the ones doing the job every day, all right? So have the opportunity to talk, to listen, and when you can use these ideas, by all the means, use them. As they feel ownership in what they're doing, if you can help them feel part of the team, part of the decision-making process, when it's applicable, go for it. You know, they need to take ownership of it, absolutely. One more point I want to back up to from the conversation we just had. We were talking about communicating. The group up front was talking about communicating and listening to your staff. You're busy, and depending on the size of your staff, you know, you can have people walking in and out all the time. I always had weekly meetings, always. And if we didn't have a lot to talk about, you know, they were short. If I had a lot to talk about, they were longer. But I would have weekly meetings, and then every, I don't know, probably once a month, I tried to meet with every employee for half an hour. If they needed me, obviously, before then. But again, just see how your goals are coming. Are there any challenges? Is there anything you need to talk to me about? Or if there's something I thought would be a good fit for them to do, that was the opportunity I used. Okay, I had 12 staff members, so it wasn't huge, it wasn't small. And that communication is huge. That was one of the things that made the big difference when I became the director, and helping them get past the negativity that had been there before and the mistrust. It's keeping the doors of communication open, meeting with your team. Nobody should be surprised about anything. There's sometimes, as a supervisor, I understand you get information you cannot share right away. I get that. But when it's something that can be shared, or you think it's going to get out through the rumor mill, or what's going to happen, then make sure you share these. So good, communicate. Keeping that feedback loop open too. Again, this comes from meeting one-on-one, from keeping an open door policy, that when they have questions, they will feel open and comfortable to talk to you, all right? Because this is what happens, and you've probably seen it. If we don't make time to talk to our employees, to answer questions, or if there's rumors going around, or something's happening, and we don't address it, or you just don't take the time to listen and they feel unheard, they're going to stop telling you things. They're going to stop communicating because they don't think it's important. And you don't want that to happen. You know, your peers, the ones who you're supervising now, are the ones that can provide the great information. So remember, if you don't keep the door open, they'll stop communicating with you, and that's not what you want to happen. So good job. I had taken over a supervisor in my Wright State job that I told you about, and I was great friends with some of the girls there. We were friends before I took that position. We went out together. We went to each other's homes, you know, the weddings, the baby showers of your kids. We did all of that. So I thought, this is not going to be a problem with my friends. I came flying back into the office one day. It probably had been about 3 months, maybe, after I had the job. And I had this big news on this contract, and I was all excited to share it. And I came up to the door of one of the girls' office. I stepped in, and she was with another coworker. And as soon as I walked in, they shut up. So guess what? They'd been talking about me, you know, and it's going to happen. I thought, wow, I didn't think these two would, you know, do that. And yeah, my closer friend out of there told me what the discussion was after. Well, I did not ask. She felt a little awkward, but that's going to happen. I mean, just things happen. And you just cannot be part of the team the way you used to. You can still be, you need to be friendly, obviously. You need to be friendly. It does not mean you can't not be friends with your peers, but definitely treating everybody alike. One of the things I instituted, we always went out to lunch. We were downtown Dayton, we always went out to lunch. That was just one of the things we did. And sometimes we go as a whole group, but other times, you know, 3 or 4 would go out, and the other 3 or 4 people were obviously better friends with others. I did not stop going out to lunch. I always threw it out there. I'm going out to lunch here today. Who wants to join me? Always put an email out. And if you got 5 or 6 people, then I'd make a reservation. Some people never joined, and those people I would invite on a one-on-one because I just didn't feel like I wanted them to feel left out. There were people that never went out, you know, so I invite them one-on-one. But typically, our lunches were, this is where I'm going today, or is anybody going to lunch somewhere today? So it was open and it was public to the department. Understanding some of the relationships made cool. It happens. It's okay. You just can't get yourself overly psyched out about it. You used to be one of the gang and now you're not. I mean, you might have been one of the people that was talking about the boss. You know, you got to lunch, you have them for lunch, and then you come back, and now guess what? Even though they're buddies, when something changes, people don't necessarily like change. Change is a hard one. And when it's changed with someone you know well, that's a little curious. They may think they get special favors. They may wonder what's going to happen. So those are all things to think about. Treating employees fairly is huge. Be professional at all times. Those you supervise need to understand that you will be different but fair. I believe in addressing the changes. As soon as I came in, I had a meeting with everybody. We shut working in the afternoon. We had a catered lunch. And we had opportunity just to talk. We aired out some of the things that were causing the problems before I stepped into that role. I allowed them to vent. I allowed them to do whatever they wanted, with the understanding that after today we're not venting anymore. I don't want to hear the past, because we're moving to the future. All right. And then we just talked about things. The elephant in the room was I'm all of a sudden supervisor, and it came as a surprise. I was asked not to say anything, so I had some people I was really close to that felt left out because they didn't know ahead of time. So anyway, just kind of thinking through these tips and how you're going to handle it, and just talking about it was the best thing for us, and letting them know I was there to help them out. You may have a situation too. Let's say you and a coworker as a peer are really good friends. I mean, good friends. Your families are good friends. You go out with them as a couple. You guys take your kids out, maybe to ball games, whatever. All right, you're super good friends. And then all of a sudden, maybe kind of like I did, da-da, they came out. There was no telling somebody ahead of time. And you're supervisor. How do you handle those kinds of situations? Do you just say, well, can't be friends anymore? And if everybody's a friend, it just makes talk about it. First of all, talk about it to your friend. I always made a rule when I went out with friends, like some of my close ones from work, that we don't talk about work. Don't ask me questions. Respect me. Don't try to pry information out of me. And we just got to have a good time. And work wasn't a topic that was allowed to be discussed. So. All right, there's a lot that can be said on this, but I really want you to think through this one. It's a big one. Ask what you can do to make their job better. What do they need from you? And looking at how organizations and corporations used to run, we're going to go way back before I was born, okay? You used to have boss on top. Boss would give the rules. We had all the little worker bees on the bottom. You came to work, you hung your hat up on the post, and you did your job. You didn't necessarily ask any questions. You didn't necessarily share any great ideas, because really, I don't want to hear them, because I am the boss, and you are a worker bee, and what could you possibly know? I'm the boss, I know everything. And there was a dude named Charles Deming. Some of you may have heard of him, who, like in the 40s, 50s, 60s in there, was really looking at organizations and the structure of organizations. And he kept thinking, wow, here's all these people on the front lines doing the job, and we're not asking them for their ideas or their input or what they know. We're just going to go ahead and do things, and oftentimes making decisions that impact the worker bees in a negative way. And if they had just asked the question of, will this work, or what can we do, it would have been so much better. And we kind of, so this was I am not an artist, but we'll see how. All right. Does anybody know what these are? People, good, Pictionary here. And what about these people? Headless people, you guys are good. Okay, headless people. So it was basically like, come to work, check your head at the door. If you want to take it home at night, okay, but then we come and work the next day and we check it at the door, okay? A couple years ago when we were moving my grandmother into assisted living, I was going through this trunk and I found a 1970 newspaper in there, which also included the classified ads in the back. And this is for a factory job. It paid $1.75 an hour. And it said, no, literally, no thinking required. Check your head. We just want you to come in, work. We don't want your thoughts about this. Check it. Well, finally, we came into the late 60s into the 70s, and we had the recessions, and it was, you know, just killing the like automotive industry and a lot of different manufacturing. And finally, Charles Deming was able to convince organizations that, you know, maybe sharing different aspects of the employees was an important thing to do. So when we bring our heads to work, what do we bring with us?
Ideas.
We bring ideas, yeah. What else do we bring?
Experience.
Some experience, solutions, creativity. I don't expect you to read all this. Communication, yeah. Bring this to work with us. So his whole idea was now worker bees were on the top, boss was on the bottom, and the idea of putting people into teams, collective teams, so we could collect the ideas and the experience, and we could communicate with each other, and we could form solutions. Because we're on the front of the job, the front line, and we know what needs to be done. In some of these manufacturing plants I used to train in, the guys had been on this line for 25, 30 years, and they knew if it was wrong by the sound of it. I mean, seriously. So it's now kind of flipped over in the role of being a coach and helping to grow and develop your employees. It's kind of, what can I do? So what do you need from me? From me, what can I do for you? It's kind of understatement in there. What do you need from me and what can I do for you? So, and this is, as you're transitioning, this is the perfect time, if it hasn't been going that way, to include this idea. How can I get your ideas? One of you groups talked about strengths. All right, looking at the strengths and leveraging the strengths of your employees. You're coming into the perfect time to work on that, include them. Find out what they love to do. Maybe what parts of their job they don't love as much. That doesn't mean they don't have to do those parts, but you know, what other strengths are and how can you use them? So again, not only are you learning to lead, all right, and to be a supervisor, but you got these people under you that you also have to develop and understand how you personally can help them get there. With all this being said, understand that it's less important to be liked than it is to be respected. I'm a people person. I think when I realized finally in my life that not everybody's going to like me, okay, I have to live with that. But to have somebody say, you know what, I'm not really crazy about Jim as a boss, but you know what, I can say he's totally fair, and I respect him. That would be something I would rather have. So just a little thought to keep in mind. We have determining how you will manage resistance. Because I know, it's shocking to believe, when you get into a new role, somebody might resist you, but just in case it happens, how are we going to manage that?
Open communication to figure out what the old issues are and how to fix them.
Yeah. So again, communication again, including the peers and the people you're supervising in on these kind of discussions is huge. Looking for solutions and how they can be fixed. I like that. What else did you talk about?
Some may purposely sabotage you. We wrote confront as soon as it may happen and don't take it personally.
Yeah. And I also like that, confront as soon as possible. Waiting to say, okay, they're going through an adjustment period. No, you don't wait. You confront as soon as you can and jump into it and work it out, you know. There's also the situation too, let's say you and another one of your peers was vying for the job, okay, and you get it and they don't. Lots of situations of where they've resisted, kind of causes problems, might try to sabotage because they thought they deserved it, maybe they'd been there longer, they thought they did a better job, whatever reason, resistance can come because you got a job over them, all right? Some of you may have been in that situation, whether maybe not here, but some other place you've worked or you've seen it happen, the big one. All right, and what's your last one?
Address issues as they come up and avoid issues to build up.
Yep, excellent, good job. Jody, would you like to introduce the panel?
Sure. This is Jerry Bergen. He is from the city of Bellbrook, and he is a road crew foreman. Is that correct? Service foreman.
Okay, very good.
And I'm Jody Merton, and I'm from MVCC.
Okay.
And,
I'm Jay Weiskircher. I'm the executive director here at the Miami Valley Communications Council. My previous life, I spent 35 years as the assistant city manager for the city of Oakwood.
I appreciate you taking time because I know it's busy, but this transitioning in from a peer to supervisor, from personally going through it, I find it a topic that is important. And it's always nice to hear from people who are in the same organization as you, share their thoughts. So, Jay, when you first got into supervision, why did you want to do it? Why did you want to be a
That's a
supervisor?
very good question. When I started at Oakwood, I started as the administrative assistant, so I really didn't have any supervisory responsibilities. So as I kind of worked my way up the organization, I had more and more people start to work under me. In most cases, I was younger than those folks, and that's a challenge I think that many people face, is supervising people who are maybe older, have more experience than you do. So that's certainly an obstacle that you have to overcome.
Same question. I'm going to ask all three of you this question.
sure. Well, I told you my life before here was Dayton Public Schools, so I'm going to sort of use that experience. I started as a classroom teacher, and I was in the classroom for probably 5 years, and I had my administrator came to me, and they were doing a cohort for aspiring principals. And all my life, I just wanted to be a teacher. And I said, oh, Mrs. Buxton, like, that's not for me. And she said, no, you're going to do this. So I feel like I was almost pushed into a role that I just never anticipated doing. And just from there, just doors opened and many opportunities came from that. But that's sort of how my supervisor experience started. And I was definitely peer to supervisor because I worked with all of those people.
And I started from ground floor up. When I started with City of Bellbrook, there was 5 employees in the service and water department. And over the years, we've gone up to 8. And I am the oldest employee there now. And what I can teach my employees and the information I can give them, they respect and appreciate. And they're always coming to me, asking me, what about this, what about that? And I don't have to go look it up in a book or find a map. And they truly respect that due to the fact that they always say, when you're gone, and I used to say the same thing, when your older peers leave, you better know something about what you're doing, or you're going to be spending a lot more time than you have to.
The transfer of knowledge.
Yes.
That's the other thing to keep in mind, right? Another question we have for you. So you've transitioned, you were a supervisor, you've gone up the ladder here. What are some of the challenges you faced transitioning, going back to that initial transitioning, or in the middle of your development career, you might have transitioning isn't always just once. You transition into other jobs. So what were some of the biggest challenges you faced during transitioning from a peer to a supervisor?
When I was at Oakwood, I did the human resources work. So over the years, gave a lot of promotional tests, and that's for people who were in the fire service, police service, public works people, people who worked in the office. And I think the most difficult thing for people is one day just being kind of one of the guys or the gals, and then the next day you're a supervisor. And that's a very difficult transition. Some people handle it okay, other people not so well. You know, it takes a special person because all of a sudden, you know, the group you used to eat lunch with or whatever, they may view you a little bit differently than they did before. You used to be one of them, now you're one of those supervisory people. And so that's a big adjustment for some people. Some people don't handle that well, so that's something that you really need to anticipate, that you're going to be treated differently or looked at differently by some of your peers. Not everyone, but some people do. So you need to prepare yourself for that. You can still be your friend, but you're now a supervisor, and that friendship is maybe a little bit different than it was before. So, you know, just be prepared for those kinds of things. I always thought that we didn't do enough of this type of stuff. Send people out and just say what you're experiencing and what you're going through is typical, it's to be expected, and here are maybe some advice or tips on how best to handle it, because it's a difficult transition, especially in smaller organizations.
Absolutely. We did spend time talking about that, so I appreciate hearing from you that you've experienced it too. It is real and it occurs. So.
Absolutely. And some people I've even seen that they would even drop out of the promotional process because the more they thought about that, they couldn't resign themselves to the fact that some of their relationships with their work colleagues were going to change if they were successful and ended up being promoted. So it's hard for people.
Do you want to tackle that, Jody?
Sure.
Okay.
From my experience is implementing change. And when I first started moving up, I was young. And I was with a very veteran staff. And, you know, I would show up at their classroom door or just professional development. And they're looking at me like, what can she tell me? I've already done all of this. So that was very challenging, and it was very intimidating. But I remember my supervisor saying, start small, build your bandwagon, get a few on your team, because success breeds success, and when they see others doing well, they're going to join your bandwagon. And that's sort of how I tackled that obstacle, but it was very intimidating, very much so.
And I also felt the same way with the upper management part of it. The bottom peers I could get along with. I was there. We have a great relationship then, and we still do, but it's learning the upper end, the do's and don'ts and the rights and wrongs.
While transitioning, while through this whole peer transition thing, can you give an example? Can you think of an example of how you would have handled a situation, what was the situation, and how would you have handled it differently?
Taking the supervisor role, it's being out in the field with contractors and having to answer questions on the spot on changes that happen at that time. You better know what you're talking about when you make that call, and make sure that if you don't, you get the right answers before, so you don't make yourself or the city look bad.
Okay. So do your homework. Make
Yes.
sure you know what you're talking
Know
about.
the facts.
Because you're right, at the end of the day, you're representing the city, and yeah, you're right. You are putting them in the best light. So.
Mm-hmm.
All right, good. Okay, Jody?
Looking back now, I think, you know, I had people above me telling me, like, this needs to happen by this date, and it was almost like they didn't care how the information got out there, but this is what needs to be implemented. But looking back, I had moved from, you know, one building to another, and it was a seasoned staff, and I was young. So maybe just knowing your who and taking the time to get to know them more individually, than just as this was their job title or this was their role, maybe having a more of an open mind, just really building those relationships and having that conversation, because as I was trying to listen to some of you and things that you were saying out earlier in here, relationships are number one. And once you can get past that, makes things a lot easier.
Right.
So when I look back, I think I would have probably done that differently, the way I approached it.
Okay, yeah. And some of that learning just comes from experience.
It
Yeah,
does, but
it
it would have been nice to hear it a long time
Nice to
ago.
gotten a heads up ahead of time, yeah. We've talked about the relationship piece, we've talked about knowing who your stakeholders are and things like
Yeah.
that, so. All right, Jay?
I think Jody would probably attest to the fact that I'm all about communication and giving people information that I feel that it is valuable to them or that they need in order to accomplish certain goals. So, I mean, what I would suggest to you, and maybe one of the mistakes that we all make, is that, you know, if you're going to be making changes within an organization, or you're going to be making decisions that are going to impact, you know, people's work situation, make sure you take the time to prep them for that. I mean, go through the process of educating people and laying out the rationale as to why, you know, you may want to do things differently than maybe they've been done before. I think most people will be very supportive of you as long as you communicate with them and give them the background information as to why you're going in that direction. Also provides you an opportunity to solicit their input and feedback. No one likes just, you know, this is an edict. You're going to do this, or we're going to do it this way or that way. Nobody likes that. Everybody would prefer if they were given the background and saying, you know, this is the rationale, this is the reason that we're going to do it differently than the way we used to. So, you know, take some time and lay the foundation, lay the groundwork to do those kinds of things, especially if you're going to make some changes as to procedures or how things are done differently in your part of the organization.
Even though you've implemented your change, if someone feels that there's something better, always listen to them, and because you may make another change to that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Kind of wearing my messy chart that I was told looked like nacho chips. It's just talking about listening to employees, you know, and it's key, getting their ideas. And when you can do one of them, it may be not what you originally thought, but they may have a better idea. They've been actually the ones doing the job, whatever. And we talked about knowing your stakeholders, and you also talked about, you know, just the communication, letting people know what you're thinking and how you're going to go about things, and getting their feedback on it is huge. And I think I had shared with you during my experience of transitioning, having meetings, sharing with people, and just getting feedback, and it's critical. Also, I also thought of while you were talking is that we mentioned this a little this day, managing up. So if I am going to make changes, I have ideas I want to do, including my supervisor into that when I'm thinking, and is always another helpful thing. When I was on campus and transitioned into my department, my supervisor on campus took time to take me to meetings with him. He was probably like the third guy on campus at that time under the provost, taking me to meetings, introducing me to people that I would need to work with directly, and making sure that I knew who the president was and could have conversations with him and get on the schedule if I needed it. And that was super helpful. It made me feel more confident too. So that may not always apply in all your situations, but again, that communication piece is just huge. All right, I got another question for you. So you've transitioned, and we've talked about some of the challenges, but not everything is challenging. So what are some of the positive factors of becoming the supervisor of former peers? Anybody can?
I think the easiest thing is that you've already done it. I mean, you're not going to ask anybody to do something that you probably haven't already done. And so you can certainly use that to your advantage.
Mm-hmm.
And I think people respect that too. You know, that's obviously going to be a positive in your direction. And I would, to the extent that you can continue to do some of those things, if it's in the Public Works Department and you got people in a hole and that's what you used to do, jump in the hole from time to time.
Exactly.
Or if you're fixing potholes, do that. Or if you're working on Excel spreadsheets, help people do that. Even though you're a supervisor now, that doesn't mean that from time to time you can't get down there and show people, hey, I remember what it was like, I've done this before and I'm here to help you. So, use that to your advantage.
By doing that, you're showing them you're still at the same level with them. You're not above them or below them.
Right, absolutely.
And they appreciate that.
They do appreciate that. You don't even imagine how much they
Yes.
appreciate that. Sometimes in training, when I hear people talk about their supervisor, they go, hey, we had this issue down the line or wherever, and my supervisor got right in there and helped. So that's key.
And the other thing I would also add is let people know that you're advocating for them. Because I'm sure, there were times that you'd sit around and talk with your co-workers about what the problems were with management or how they did certain things. Now that you're in a position to maybe try and influence that, let people know that you are trying to do that. And also let them know that sometimes change takes time and it's not going to happen overnight, but just make sure that they know that you're being an advocate for them. That doesn't mean that you can guarantee that things are going to change. But let people know that, you haven't forgotten those discussions that we used to have. And that people should feel free to come to you when they have problems, when they have circumstances, when they have situations that you can possibly help them with.
That builds a good trust.
The number one thing that employees want out of their management, the characteristic is trust. They want to be able to trust you. And that's one way to build it too.
I was just going to say one of the positive factors is and remember what it was like to always be on that side. Mm-hmm. So when you are supervising them and you have to make a decision or something occurs, just remember how they're going to feel or because you were there. I'm obviously using my experience as classroom teacher, administrator, but I just say teachers are in the trenches every single day. Same with probably our police officers. You're out in the streets, you're in the work. So when you start moving up and you might not be in that work every day dealing with that clientele or people, just remember what it was like when you were there anytime you need to make a decision. Because, you think you don't get removed from it, but sometimes you do because society changes. I started in the late 90s and did the work for a little over 21 years. Society has changed. So the longer you're pulled away from that work, just remember what it was like.
I want to know what your biggest learning has been. What advice would you give to someone who is supervising former peers or just going into leadership in general? What's your biggest learning? What advice?
Patience.
Patience?
Patience, patience, patience.
Okay.
You can explain something to somebody and they say they understand it and they totally didn't get it. And then they go out to do the job and you have to go out and correct them. And you just got to train. Patience and training. And once they do it repetitiously enough, hopefully they'll get it.
They'll get it, okay? So definitely having patience
Yes.
in training. I think it was at this table we were talking about sometimes you'll train and you think everybody has it, and maybe at that moment they know they don't, but everybody else looks like they have it. So they don't want to be the one that says, excuse me, I don't get it. So then they'll go out and not do it correctly until you realize it's a training issue and we have to go back. So yeah, definitely.
So I'm going to say what Jerry said, patience. I'm just the type of person that I just want it done, and I know that I'm going to just get it done. And so letting go of that and maybe delegating that out a little bit. It's funny that Jerry just said that because I just have to share this. He worked for my dad when I was a little girl, so we were both kind of trained by the same person. Okay. And he had zero patience. So the fact that we're both piggybacking on that might be because that's who trained us. But if I have X, Y, and Z and I have somebody under me and I'm expecting them to do it, like, I just want it done. And so for me to step back and let that happen was probably difficult. So yeah, just the patience of it. And also know that just because you tell somebody what needs to be done or you explain to them, you don't know how they've perceived that. And then how are they actually going to apply that when they're doing it? It's probably going to look different than what you might think. So you just have to take those learning styles and how people actually work and their ethic of producing it or getting it done. So it goes back to patience.
I guess I would suggest to you, as difficult as this is, try and be positive and upbeat, because people pick up on that. I mean, if you're always down in the dumps, or every day it seems like it's work, it's actually work for you to come to work and to supervise people. People pick up on that, and that's how they're going to approach their jobs too. So I realize no matter what you do in an organization, it can be routine, mundane, boring. Things can happen that tick you off and everything. But to the extent that you can be positive, you can pick people's spirits up, you can make work interesting, you can sometimes make it fun. I mean, try to do those kinds of things. Make sure that you recognize employees. Here's maybe the best advice I could ever give someone. If you're going to be critical of people, that's fine, but make sure that when they do a good job that you praise them too, because they're not going to respect you if all you ever do is yell at them or they're in trouble for something. So if you're willing to hold them accountable, then praise them when they do something. And that means, take the time to write them an attaboy or an attagirl note that goes in their personnel file. You'd be surprised how important that is to some people. And, different people have different buttons. So the button you push for this person may be a different button than that person. So you need to know who you're dealing with. And you have to you'll hear people say this, don't treat employees differently. Well, you have to treat employees differently because they're all different. What motivates employee A may not motivate employee B. So, treat people as individuals, get a handle on what their hot buttons are, what you can do to encourage them along, what are some of the things that you don't want to say to them. So get to know your people both, work-wise, ask about their families and stuff. That's important to people. And you don't have to get into their business or anything else, but, a lot of people pick up on that too. Yeah, you don't care about me, you don't care about my family, you never ask about my family, my kids, this, that, or the other. I mean, to the extent that somebody will, converse with you about that, talk to them about those things. Some people are very private, they don't want you to know their business, but other people, just let them know that they're human beings, they're something other than just being there to get a task accomplished.
Great, it's perfect advice, and it truly is important, and it truly works. Just getting involved and understanding the people. I had a supervisor once at the university who said, I may have the most horrible night before I come to work, but you will never know it. And honestly, you never did. If he was having a bad day or something went wrong, he didn't bring that into work with him. Sometimes he may share one-on-one with someone, but you did not see a bad mood or negative vibes coming out of that person. So,
your supervisor makes a decision that you have to relay to your staff, and they give you a big pushback. How do you deal with that? Because it's not going to change. You're going to do it this way, whether they like it or not, but they're pushing back really hard.
You just got to tell them, look, we've got to get this done, and this is the way they want it done, and there's no ifs, ands, buts about it. I'm sorry, I can't change it for you. Let's all man up here and just get it done and get on to the next job.
My famous line was always, don't kill the messenger. And sometimes before the information was given out, like I said, I kind of created a bandwagon of a few. So I had that support when the message was actually being delivered. sometimes too, if you have some data or information or research or facts of why this is happening, people will buy into that a little bit. But that is a tough situation. But just don't kill the messenger. That was my famous line.
You know, I guess try not to throw people under the truck. I mean, if that came from a supervisor, and maybe you don't necessarily agree with the decision either. I mean, that happens a lot too. But don't throw people under the bus. I mean, you got to communicate that. You're wearing your big boy pants now because you're a supervisor. I mean, you got to communicate that to people. There's nothing wrong with empathizing with people, and like Jody just said, maybe explain to them some of the thought processes that went into that. They still may not buy into that, but I guess the bottom line is, you know, we're going to try it this way for a while. If there are ways that we can improve upon it, you know, we're open to that. But you know, sometimes you just have to bite the bullet. But you know, like I say, don't throw people under the bus. That you don't get any credit for that, and that's going to come back to haunt you.
So I just want to, what Jay is saying, I started out, you know, young, but as I cycled through, my very first supervisor and I, 18 years later, ended up in cubicles right next to each other. And so just don't ever burn bridges. Even if you don't care for that person, always try to reflect back of why they're behaving or why they're acting some way, but don't burn bridges. You never know when that person is going to be your equal, or you might be above them, or because life happens. And I just, my whole career did a 360. I mean, she and I were right next to each other. And then right before I came here, my paraprofessional aide was a former student of mine, and we worked together every single day. So you just never know where you're going to end up or who's going to be right next to your side. So as hard as that is sometimes, you got to, like Jerry said, be an adult, man up, but don't burn bridges.
Let me just add, and I think I just touched upon this. I think the hardest thing to do is to communicate to somebody information or a policy or whatever that you don't necessarily buy in with. I mean, that is very, very difficult, and that is a real challenge. And all of you are going to face that at some point in time in your career. And how you handle that is kind of a measure of whether or not you're going to be successful or not. So, you know, that's a challenge that everybody has to deal with. And all you can do is, you know, hopefully you have input into why that decision was made, and you put forth your arguments. But, you know, if the ultimate decision is not really in the direction you would like it to go, it's still your obligation to communicate it down and say, hey, this is how we're going to do it, and we all need to buy into this.
And something to add into that, Jay, is a lot of times your boss may come to you and not have time to tell you the whole story at that time. He just wants you to do this part of the job. There may be something lurking down the road that's going to change, and he doesn't have time to explain it to you, or they haven't come up with the final solution. So really, a lot of times when they say, you know, this is what we got to do, and it's not making sense, you just go out and do what they ask.
In the past, you know, you've been in one organization. It was the norm to be in one organization for 30 or 40 years and spend your whole career there. And kind of the new norm, especially like she was talking about earlier, they push in universities.
Yes.
You know, you're in one place for 5 years, and then it's kind of the norm to switch to something else. Maybe it's the same role. Maybe you take a supervisor role at a different organization, but you know, do you think it changes the advice of the relationships that you build being in one organization for a long time versus trying to move organizations every couple of years?
Well, I'm going to say if you leave an organization and you go to a new place and you step into that supervisor leadership role, you're already going to be looked at differently anyways because you were never their equal or their peer. But I just think that if that happens, you want to know your who. You want to know who is under you, what their strengths are, how they're going to perceive your communication, because if they weren't your former peer, you're not going to know anything about them. So you need to take the time to learn that because it is about the rapport and getting to know. I just always you have to lead by example. And I think we all said it in here earlier. Don't expect them to do anything that you wouldn't do. But I think it's almost to an advantage sometimes for them not to know you. But there's positives to also move up as well. But I think you're looked at a little bit differently entering that position.
I would add one more thing. Be real cautious when you go to a new organization. You don't trash the one you came from.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because kind of like what
Yes.
Jody said, you'd be surprised how small of a network it is. Down the road, something may happen and that may keep you, they might be like, they left here and badmouthed us, so why do we? Just be cautious.
Exactly.
Even if you didn't agree or you left on bad terms,
Yep.
think of yourself down the
Right.
road, long term. Just
Right.
Don't badmouth everyone.
Absolutely not.
Because
Right.
especially what I'm learning coming from education to even here, everybody knows everybody.
Yeah.
Especially when it's like the local government, this person was in this city, now they're in this city. It was the same when I was in education. This principal is now a principal in this district. So there's some connection. So just I tell my kids this, just because you think it doesn't mean it needs to come out of your mouth. Like,
Right.
you can think whatever you want, just don't let it out.
Yes.
I think being a supervisor is all about building relationships, and I think, people who are in an organization for 3 or 4 years and then they move on and then they move on to somewhere else, I think you lose some of that ability there. That's just my opinion. I came from a generation where people, they started working somewhere, and that's, if they liked it, that's where they finished their career. I realize things are different now, that people do move around, but like I say, I think being a supervisor is all about building relationships, and in a lot of cases that takes time. The other thing I would also mention to you is, be an advocate for your employees. If they have good ideas or, a different way to do stuff, listen to them, and if you feel that it has credibility and you need to take it to the next level, do that for them. That may not necessarily mean that things are going to change or somebody is going to accept it, but again, be an advocate for them. By the same token, if somebody comes up with an idea that's probably not the best idea or whatever, tell people that. Be honest with people. Don't tell somebody they have a good idea when you don't think that the idea is a good idea. Just treat people, practice the golden rule. Treat people the way you want to be treated. And that's what I used to tell the supervisors who I kind of had some control of. Treat people the way you want to be treated. It's not always easy to do that, and you're always going to have favorite employees, but as you look at a group of people, just try to treat them the way you want to be treated, and I think you'll be successful as a supervisor.
Yes. And the other thing is, like Jay was saying, know your employees, utilize those guys the best you can, and mix your groups up. Don't just put A with A every day, B with B. Mix those guys up, let them intermingle, let them train them on different things, give them the lead, let them go out and do their thing. If they're doing something wrong, correct that person, or as a group, explain to them what they're doing wrong, but let them go at it, they feel better doing the job and knowing that they're doing it right.
Thank you so much for
Thanks,
coming
everybody.
and your
Good luck.
time, and we appreciate you sharing from your experience, and it always makes me feel good because it kind of validated some of the things we already talked about. So anyway, thank you very much. This is another statistic. According to Gallup, 75% of people quit their jobs are not leaving the company. They're not leaving the company, but they're leaving their manager. Typically, they're leaving their immediate supervisor. You have got to understand how much influence, how much power, if you want, or control you have over an employee's satisfaction on the job and their engagement. You guys, you hold it. You really do. And usually it's not because they don't like the job. That's not it. It's the immediate supervisor. So as a manager, as a supervisor, you're responsible for employee performance. All right? Some of them aren't cut for the job. They're not going to make it. We know that. So when we're working with our employees. Some, it's just not a job fit. Some, maybe they really don't have the skills. You've got some employees who probably do not need to be in the organization. I get that. Others could be more engaged depending on things like how much do they feel like the supervisor trusts them to do a job well, work on maybe special projects, tells them that they appreciate what they're doing, communicates with them. They kind of talked on that already on the slides, but engaged employees, you know, they're the ones who are totally engaged. They're all in, feet first. They're in your organization with you. Not engaged, all right, this is the group that makes part of that 70% up. Sometimes they're kind of checked out, if you will. They're showing up to work every day. They're mentally on vacation mode, oftentimes. They're kind of walking through your day, but they're not putting any energy, any passion, or anything extra into the job. And then there's your actively disengaged person. This could be the person who may try to sabotage as you go through your transition. They're not unhappy. They don't want anybody to be happy. They act out their unhappiness. And every day these workers undermine what their engaged workers accomplish, or what even their slightly disengaged coworkers want to accomplish. So it's real. People have been studying on this. It talks about it. I teach this workshop all the time on engagement, but it doesn't seem to change. It just doesn't seem to change. We don't expect everybody to be overly creative, come up with these super creative ideas all the time. However, even as our panel was talking about, the people who do the job know a lot about it, and giving them the opportunity to come up with creative solutions, creative ideas, be involved in the work. I think with your question about the person who was a friend or is a friend that's not acting much like a friend because of her promotion, and just the thought that was going through my mind at the time is give it some time, but then pull them in. You know their strengths, you know, a special project, something they could do, working to employee strengths, what they do well, give them jobs that if they're really creative people that bring extra creativity to them, if they're more, you know, helping them grow and develop as employees, maybe finding areas that they're strong in and letting them do some things that come along that way in terms of innovation. I had that little slide on there about how many, 46% of adults consider themselves creative or something like that, but 98% of all 5-year-olds consider themselves creative. It's true. If I was teaching kindergarten, probably if I asked my students, who could come up here and draw for me a big purple bunny rabbit with polka dot web feet and shiny green ears, we would have 98% of the class come up and say, I can, all right? If I ask you guys who's going to do that for me, you'd be all sitting there staring at me. Why? Why don't you want to come up and draw that bunny? It's because rabbits are white or gray. They're not, you know, purple. They don't have shiny green ears. They don't have, you know, polka dot web feet. That's not what a bunny looks like. We go through school. I think we start out with creativity. We just start out, you know, our people encourage us and we're creative and we come up with things, but then after a while somebody informs you that rabbits aren't purple. Why are you stupid? Ducks have webbed feet, not bunnies. And as we learn and we comment and we grow, reality and life comes in and creativity can get stifled and stopped and stopped. So we start life oftentimes with a big question mark full of wonder and adventure and creativity. If we're not careful, we're going to end up a dot, a period, because this is reality. As adults, that creativity in us is there. Sometimes I teach a class on creativity and people say to me, I'm not creative. Yeah, we are in different ways, but it's been stomped out, you know, in a way because of life. And just keeping in mind that there's something creative or interesting all our employees can do. The Gallup spent years interviewing people on what engaged them, what factors had to occur at work for them to put 100% of them in. What made them become part of the 30% that says they are engaged? What needs to be there? And they finally got it down to about 178 questions that were answered, and then they got it down even further from that. And at the end of their research, after they sorted through all the questions and sorted through all the answers from literally thousands of people, these were the 12 that rose to the top. They are consistently, this started in 1998, to this day, they're consistently the same 12 questions that rise to the top. So I just want you to look at these and look at the 12 questions. All right, how many, by a raise of hands, how many of you put one of the things that are important for you is, I know what's expected of me at work? Yeah, I'd say about a good third of you. That's one of the things that was important. I have the materials and equipment I need to do my job right. Have the resources. About half of you have that one. At work, I have the opportunity to do what I do best every day. Yeah, that's about another third. In the last 7 days, I've received recognition or praise for doing good work. Yeah, that's not a big praise at me group, or I haven't got it. We have if you're listening to Jay up there talking about recognition and praise, so are you getting it? If not, remember when the roles are turned around that you give this. Jay was talking about how important that is. There's a saying in training was catch me doing something right, because as supervisors oftentimes we're busy and it's easy to catch a person doing something wrong or trying to fix something, but catch me doing something right. Just a quick side story on this. I had, when I took over the job downtown, they had a client who they lost. It was a big client, and they had lost it, and the relationships had not been good. So one of my things I was determined at was trying to figure out what was wrong and how we could fix it. After a bit of time, we got them back, and it was their first time coming back into their building, us doing, they just rented from us first. They didn't hire us to do the training, but they said they'd bring their own computer equipment. I had to be out of town for my own training that day, and when I got back at the end of the day, they were still there, and a woman grabbed me and said, "Oh my heavens, thank you so much." She said, "We decided not to rent the equipment. We brought our own and it didn't work and none of us knew how to fix it. But your tech person, even though they didn't have to, went ahead and fixed everything and hooked it up with some of your equipment and made sure it worked." She goes, "I can't thank you enough." And she goes, "I'm going to get with you about doing something else." So I had just come from training in customer service, all right? So I had taken just a note card, and I wrote a note to my employee, what they had done, how I appreciated, how it made me feel, and the impact it had on the customer. That's all I wrote. And I left it on her desk and went off and did something else. When I came back, she called me over like this, and she picked it up, and she was crying. She was, I mean, she's a little teary-eyed. She goes, "Cindy, this is all we want. This is all we want. We want to be recognized for a good job. Sometimes we just need praise. Sometimes we just need a pat on the back. But that's all we want." And it only took me a few minutes to do that. What can you do in those? My manager at someone at work seems to care about me as a person. Yeah, about half of you. There is someone at work who encourages my development. That's a key one. Good, about half of you. At work, my opinions seem to count. Okay, very good. The mission or purpose of my company makes me feel my job is important. Okay, half of you. My associates or fellow employees are committed to doing quality work. Okay. I have a best friend at work. I should have clarified this. It doesn't have to be a best friend you hang out with afterwards, but somebody I feel like I can talk to if you have to vent a little bit to. It's someone who you feel close to. Okay. In the last 6 months, someone at work has talked to me about my progress. And this last year, I've had opportunities at work to learn and grow. And that's a pretty big one. You're sitting here today. This is the Gallup poll. These are the top 12 items that people look for at work to keep them engaged. And a lot of them stem from supervisors. It's not just, my daughter asked me if I could coach a younger friend of hers that just graduated from college. She got her first big girl job, and it was management trainee, and she was all excited. Probably a month after she was into it, she started talking to me about how much she hated it. And it really, all her complaints factored that none of this was there. Anything that would engage a person wasn't there. After 3 months, she left and went back to Texas Roadhouse because Texas Roadhouse employed a lot of those concepts. Thank you. Hope there's some tips you can take with you.